Okay. Flipping 50 tribe member, I want to know, what were the books sitting on your nightstand that you just couldn't put down when you were a tween? Maybe your early teens, maybe a little bit later even. Do you remember them? The author, the favorite author you had, or the books that maybe you weren't quite sure you wanted your parents to know that you were reading them or wanted them to ask you about them. Think on that for a moment. I'm going to share my reveal during this podcast. And the reason I'm doing that is because today's podcast guest has her own book, and I truly believe it's going to be this century's book that replaces the coming of age books that we read when we were younger. But don't be thinking you're just going to gift it. If you went away and you thought, I don't have daughters, so what good is this going to be? Actually, you may want to get your hands and read this one for yourself first. Before we dive into today's episode, and I introduce you to my guest with a juicy accent, and I'm a sucker for accent, you all know. I want to let you know on two announcements happening on the Flipping 50 front. Number one, I'm here all the time, every week with a podcast, but I'm also here once a month with a specific open to the public Flipping 50 masterclass. And this one is for you. 12 times a year, I show up the second Wednesday of every month, and we deep dive into a topic that is based on some of the most frequently asked questions from our community and collectively over my 37 years of working with women in midlife. And we deep dive into topics like libido, one of the hot topics, pun intended, over the last few years, bone density, how to maintain lean muscle mass and strength, which in turn helps you decrease the likelihood you will either add fat or helps you lose fat if you need to become optimal in your body composition. I address things like how much protein and what is high quality protein. I also share with you how do you modify certain exercises so that you can do them if other exercises that focus on major muscle groups hurt your joints. I've got all the problems and all the solutions, and we dig into them every month. The best place to get the notice is to join me at flipping50.com and make sure you're a subscriber. So head on over there. I'll put the link in the show notes. And number two, this announcement is short but juicy. Coming up June 1st, it all starts. So if you're listening in May of 2021, you are in the right place. If you still are looking and feeling that your exercise program is not giving you the results that you want, you're not feeling the energy or the vitality that you want, and you're convinced that exercise is a key, but you're not sure anymore that what you're doing is really helping, the 10-day hot, not bothered challenge is for you. What I'm going to give you over 10 days is an exercise video every day. And I'm going to spend some time whispering in your ear with an audio that I want you to listen to before you do the workout so that you understand the what and the why behind what I've programmed for you. You'll be able to do the workouts in less than 35 minutes, and you'll be able to listen to the audios probably in less than in 5 in most cases. But I know that women in our community want to know the what and the why behind what it is they're asked to do so that they can be more compliant and it makes more sense to them. So I'm giving it to you. The sooner you get in, the sooner you get access to some of the pre-programmed materials that will make you feel better right away, move easier and more comfortably, and you'll get even more out of the challenge once it starts. Now, here's a heads up. This is not a boot camp. I'm not going to give you extreme exercise or pound you into the ground for 10 days. I'm going to give you a thoughtful, plan, the same one I would do for myself or my private clients. So you will have some strength training, you will have some interval training, you'll have some lighter, lower intensity workouts, and you'll have some recovery days. And it will all complement the day before and the day after. And that's the second piece that you'll be learning is how will you plan your optimal exercise program? What's the difference between that and potentially what you're doing now? But if you're not doing anything, by the way, this is still appropriate for you. So if what you're doing isn't working or you know you need to start, this is just a no-brainer. And here's why. There's a $49 registration fee. You will earn that back if you do each of 10 days. I want to hold you accountable to yourself so that you do those 10 days and you'll log in and tell me you've done it in Facebook. Then you'll get that $49 credit back to apply to your next step with Flipping 50. And at the end of the 10 days, you'll be invited, if you've successfully completed them, to a private masterclass where you get access to me to get all of your questions answered. So there you have it. I'm going to put the link in the show notes. You want to get registered as quickly as you can. And then, my friends, I hope to see you June 1st. If you've already done that challenge, or you're already a part of our greater community in our Flipping 50 membership, then pass this on to a friend. It's what girlfriends do for each other, right? All right. Without further ado, let's dive into this episode.
Flipping 50 audience, I have got a treat for you. My guest today is none other than Nat Kringoudis. And yes, I practiced that 7 times before we went live. She is a 2 times best-selling author, 2-time podcast host, and all-around women's health and natural fertility practitioner. And when I started that sentence, each time I wanted to say, just all-around good girl. You're going to love her. She founded Melbourne's home of natural health, her clinic, the Pagoda Tree, where she's helped over 20,000 women rescue their hormones and reclaim their best life. You may even know her from her old online TV series, Healthtalks, or her latest book, Beautiful You. If you feel like there has to be another way, there is. She's here to provide you with another option. Nat believes there isn't one way and is on a mission to educate and empower women just like you so you can get clued up on your body and take control of your hormone health. She's here to help you ditch the stress, the confusion, and the endless disappointment and give your body the love and attention it deserves. And first of all, to Nat directly, I cannot believe it's taken me so long to get you on the podcast because, well, I'm in love with what you do and how you do it. And I've kind of got a girl crush on your accent. So there's that. But your book, Beautiful You, this audience will so appreciate what I'm about to say. This book is the Are You There, God? It's me, Margaret, of this century. Do I have any other Judy Blume fans in the house? I know I do. I know there's hands up out there. I know you're walking and you're like, yeah, that was me. So, Nat, so good to have you here.
Oh my goodness, how am I supposed to actually talk after such a beautiful introduction? Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I got to tell everybody when they probably know that I'm so time zone challenged that we actually had this set up earlier and then something happened and we just don't have to go into the dirty details, but this is our second date, folks. So
all good. It's all good. And it happens all the time. And I have to tell you, I am a former time zone challenged person, but I have been reborn and I've had to just get used to it. And the funny thing is I always work on Central Time because that's where I normally am when I'm there. And so everything is just, I can work it out. If I know Central Time, I can work out anything.
And there you have it. And so she just actually busted me, because it is when you say I'm time zone challenged that of course you will be. So
Well, I just had this conversation this morning with my daughter who had a French test. And she says to me, I am going to fail. And I said, sweetie, if you start with I'm going to fail, the likelihood of you are going to fail is more probable, because that's what you're telling your subconscious. So maybe just don't do that. Maybe just be like, I'm going to get this done. And so I've already had this conversation, and it's only 7:00 in the morning where I am. So, I couldn't agree more with that.
all right. So I'm going to watch my tongue all the way through. That you are really here to kind of school us. And I find some ironic humor in the fact that in the last week here, we've been talking about libido. We've been talking about the fact that some of the women who are over 50, over 60 aren't all that comfortable talking about this subject. Makes us a little squirmish because the way we were raised so conservatively. So to ask you this question is a little bit funny. So when is it that we should start talking to our children and or grandchildren, for some of my listeners, about their sexual and reproductive health?
Yeah, this can be a little bit of a confronting question, especially if maybe your children are a bit older, but like you said, your grandchildren or your loved ones especially. From the minute that they start asking questions, we really, I believe, have an obligation and duty of care to answer. And I think if we do that, it just becomes this natural evolution of a conversation that keeps on happening, no different to, questions about Auntie Joan or whoever else, it becomes just something that evolves over time. And I also think we're doing a massive disservice to our children if we're lying to them. And we don't lie to, the reason that we've lied is obviously to be modest or in our minds maybe protect them from information they're not ready to hear. But I think we can always have this conversation in a age appropriate way. And so, what I've found in my experience is the minute that your child starts asking, they're ready to learn at that point. They're curious. It's an opening for a conversation. It's a beautiful opportunity. And it doesn't have to be a sequence of events played out based on your own personal encounters. It just is a factual question to answer. Mum, where did I come from? Is as simple as saying, well, Dad has egg and Mum has sperm and they need to meet, and that's conception. And a 4-year-old will generally accept that, whereas we get a bit uncomfortable, I guess, because we've had an experience that is not only physical but also emotional around a sexual encounter. So, or, being intimate with somebody. So kids don't have that. They don't care about the detail. They just want the facts. And if we start to do this appropriately, I think we actually get to change the landscape of our awareness of our body, but also the conversation for years to come, so that our children can feel comfortable coming to us at any time.
I love that. And I have to admit, so I have a 26-year-old, and it was, 3 years ago, maybe 2.5, at Christmas time, he brought his girlfriend to see me in Colorado. So they flew from another state, the two of them, and that was kind of a big deal. And then as we got closer, I was like, well, I have one spare bedroom. I'm like, how do I handle this? And I'm like, oh my God, I'm almost blushing over the fact I have to text my kid and say, I don't want to embarrass anybody, least of all myself. Do you want to sleep in the same room, different rooms? Do I want to blow up the air mattress? How do I handle this? So I get this very short, curt text back, LOL, same room. And I'm like, whew, okay, I'm done.
But see, do you not feel like, and it's not anyone's fault because this just wasn't what we did, right? We didn't talk about it. So therefore we haven't talked about it. And what that means is that as adults, we don't actually properly know ourselves, and we don't have the information, sometimes the courage or just the ability to have that conversation because it's embarrassing. And I think we need to change that, definitely. And if you had have had these conversations earlier, maybe it would be different now. I don't know. But everybody has their own set of beliefs, their own I guess for lack of a better description, rules. And that's still fine. It doesn't mean that you can't talk about these things, though. And I think the more that we talk about it, the more we open up for not just conversation, but to build on relationships and trust as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to go back to the way you described how much like children, like that 4-year-old who would accept like the simple answer and be done with it because they don't have that emotional experience that we do that complicates everything so much. So that has got to lend itself then, I would think, to a child who's older, a tween or a teen, being much more open about coming to ask questions because it's never been uncomfortable. It's just been, of course, I would ask that question.
Of course, 100%. And I think building this, I've got a 12-year-old, almost 13-year-old next week, which means she's a teenager nearly. But, I think we're doing a better job. I know that the education systems are doing a better job with talking about it, at least in an educational environment, but that still extends to what happens at home. And I have to say, I don't feel like I did a great job when she was younger because I didn't have this awareness. It was only because of my work and realizing that I needed to reach out to younger women, not just women when they were ready to have babies. And that then led me down this path of looking at, well, what point do we start to talk about this? And at what point do we teach, especially young girls, to appreciate their body and not see it as some mystical, separate part of themselves? And that is how this conversation actually came to be. And I can say that at the moment she did start asking questions probably around the age of 8, even though she would have asked them earlier. And I probably would have used excuses like go and ask your father, or the stork brought you, or the doctor helped get you in there, which that's not necessarily untrue for women using assisted conception. And there's absolutely many ways to have a baby that, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter how you get your baby, it's getting your baby. And so I then started to be able to bring this into our household and these conversations with Olivia. And I'll never forget one day she came to me and she was sitting there and she said, "Mum, I need to talk to you." And I was like, "Oh, here we go." And she said, "I've got one word." And I said, "Oh, what's that, sweetie?" And she said, "Period." And I said, "Oh, were you talking about periods today at school with your friends?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Oh, well, why are you worried about this? Like, where'd the word come from?" And she said, "We were talking about it at school with the teachers." And first of all, I was mortified, not because I don't want her to know what a period is. We'd spoken about a period. We just hadn't given it a name. We'd spoken about how the lining comes away. We'd spoken about the sequence of events with ovulation, and if there's not fertilization, then your lining comes away. And I just hadn't given it a name yet because she sort of didn't seem like she was ready to hear that. And so when she came to me and she said this, I was quite upset, to be honest. I thought that as parents we would be given the option to at least know that this conversation was happening at school. And also I would have liked to have had the conversation with her first.
Mm-hmm.
And then she proceeded to tell me how bad it was going to be. She said, "Mum, the teachers told us it's going to be bad. It's going to be painful. It's a little bit scary. We don't need to worry, but we need to be prepared that it's probably not going to be something that we really like." And I was so disappointed because in her mind, that's her idea ingrained already that we're going to get this period and it's going to be painful. Oh, the other thing she said to me was, "Well, I think it's coming." And I said, "Well, why do you think it's coming, sweetie?" And she said, "Because apparently you get moody and then you get it." And I was like, well, you can tick the moody box, yes. But she was horrified and petrified, and I didn't want it to be like that, given that it shouldn't be like that. And that can be news to women as well, finding out that their period shouldn't be a horrible experience every month. And I didn't want her to set that up as her belief around her menstrual cycle. That's something that is really such a powerful thing that happens that we really are also disconnected from. So, I was happy that she came to me and she felt comfortable coming to me. I actually have to say I was very, very pleased with myself at that point. But then I had to go down this whole conversation route with her where I had to try and change the way that she was thinking about it based on that very first experience that she'd had at school.
Wow, that's a shocker. Okay, so hopefully none of those women are in menopause, because then she's really in trouble.
Well, this is the thing too, but I feel like if I hadn't have had those earlier conversations, it would have been such a bomb for a 10-year-old to learn. And I know that's what happened with me. My mum, probably around the age of 12, she gave me a book. It was all news to me up until that point. And I was like, wow, I had no idea my body was about to go through all of these epic changes. And it felt really scary. And in hindsight, if I had have had this evolving conversation about something that's just fact, that just happens, like any other biological thing that we're very happy to talk about, then it wouldn't have been this mystical thing that was about to happen. It would have just been this natural progression, no different to, any other changes that happen as we grow. And we're constantly going through phases and stages. We just don't talk about them.
Okay, so I think you need to get into the school system, girlfriend, and change things.
I know.
Oh my gosh. All right, so I wanna fast forward just a little bit, because kind of along those lines, I think, I was flirting a little bit with sexual activity, first serious boyfriend, and then I wasn't having a regular period. And when I wasn't, it was like, okay, until there was a little sexual activity. And then I was like nervous all the time.
Mm.
And, so I want to talk about the pill, because I know you and a lot of others are kind of behind the fact that that's probably not a great solution. And why is it such a terrible one for teens?
Yeah, I think this is a particularly important conversation to be having. And look, I'm not opposed to the pill as such. I want women to have as much information before they make choices. And I think that's where we run into a problem when it comes to birth control as a form of treatment. It's different if you're using it as a means of contraception. And I'll talk about that for teens in a minute, but I do just want to touch on this point. It's one thing to use birth control pills for contraception. And if that's made out of, being wise enough, working out if that is actually for you, looking at the risks associated, weighing up the pros and cons, and that's what you decide, then that's one thing. But if we're using it to treat everything from period pain to irregular periods to acne to mood swings, anxiety, you name it, we use it to treat it. It's not a solution. It doesn't fix the problem. And unfortunately, women are led to believe that it is a solution and only find themselves either in just as much trouble, I guess, when it comes to their health, whether they utilize it or don't treat the problem. It might offer you some relief, and this is where I say to patients, look, sometimes we just need a break in the weather, and that's one thing. But to use it as a long-term, or for it to be sold to you as a long-term solution when it doesn't actually treat the problem, that's where I really have a bee in my bonnet, because we're not necessarily informed, and it just means that later on down the track, when maybe we're ready to have children and we transition off the pill, those problems are there, and they're often tenfold because they haven't actually been addressed. So I think that's a big problem to begin with. The other issue when it comes to teens is we definitely go through a phase around the age of 16 where our periods become irregular, and that's really normal, and our bodies mimic somewhat something like polycystic ovarian syndrome, where there are these peak hormone changes, and it's like I said, it's normal to see irregular periods, but it's often the time that as a mother we'd be really worried about our daughter having irregular periods, or ourselves as a 16-year-old freaking out that we're pregnant every month. And so birth control pills definitely become what appears to be a great solution at this point. The issue with this is, firstly, like I said, it's normal for us to have irregular periods for a short while during that age. Also, our hormones aren't sexually mature until around the age of 21. And so if you're not allowing that maturation to naturally occur and you're halting that by using birth control pills, unfortunately, when you come off the pill, so say you start the pill at 16 and you decide at 26 you don't want to take it anymore, you're as sexually mature as a 16-year-old. And that can be problematic if you've already got issues that you aren't treating and using the pill to somewhat band-aid. That can be a diabolic situation, especially for fertility. So research tends to indicate that the longer you can wait to use the pill, the less problematic it is on our health and our hormones. And for me, letting parents know this, to look at the reasons behind the hormone imbalance at that age, is far more not just empowering, but it's also necessary for long-term health of our teenagers. So, we need to work out why a teenager is experiencing hormone imbalance, not just think that the buck stops with the pill. And then also for teenagers, if they're using the pill and not using barrier methods, that's another whole issue as well. They should be really encouraged to use protection from STDs and other diseases that are sexually transmitted, because they can be really problematic for long-term health as well. So to me, it is quite problematic, the pill, and it's not that I don't think it has a place. I just think it's well overprescribed.
Yeah, I love this conversation. And I want to dig into something that may be distracting for some of my audience members right now. And this is a whole maybe values prospect that we don't necessarily want to go into for everybody, but there are some listeners, in my audience is anywhere from their mid 40s to, 75. And, they may want to believe or hope that their teen is not sexually active. How damaging, how detrimental could that be if you bury your head in the sand and don't have a conversation about it?
Yeah, it's really very interesting that you asked that. And I think the hard part is that if they're going to do it, they're going to do it. And so wouldn't we rather them be honest and open with us, or at least have these conversations? I know my parents had expectations around, what they wanted and what our beliefs were as a family. And the reality is, like I said, if they're going to be sexually active, you want them to have all of the information that is available. The other thing that happens at this point is that if they're not having this conversation and they're not getting this information from you, they're turning to Google. And that can be a slippery slope, because what you'll find if you start to Google certain questions around sex especially is you'll end up on some type of very average porn site that then creates the issue of creating a whole set of expectations about what their first sexual encounter is going to be like, what may or may not happen that's completely incorrect and completely not representative of especially a first sexual encounter. And I surveyed teens and I surveyed mothers when we were writing and marketing Beautiful You, and I asked this question, where do you go for your information? And 90% of teens were Googling. And I really feel like that's it's a disservice that we have a responsibility. And I think the other thing I do want to say is we can't preach to our teenagers. Nobody wants to be preached to. We obviously can set boundaries and expectations, but it's really also a case of monkey see, monkey do. I hate to put it that way, but we are led by example. And so at this point in time, we really need to lay that foundation of an example rather than being preached to. And that comes with a level of self-care, self-respect, and these conversations that need to happen. And we at some point have to hope that we've ingrained this into our children so that they can make these decisions not out of fear, but out of respect for themselves. And there is a chapter in the book that I ask this question, like, when should I have sex? Because again, whether we like it or not, they are doing it. Not all, but many of them are. And I would want them to have access to this information. And I make reference to this for many, many reasons. A lot of us as adults are encouraging our teenagers to wait, and that's for a magnitude of reasons. But also when we do have these sexual encounters, we do have this emotional attachment also that happens at this point in time. And it's about being mature enough to deal with this as well. It's not just a physical thing. There's a lot that comes with that. There's a lot of ramifications of that. And so making sure that you've maybe considered all of these things, whether it's out of religious belief or just a belief of what our parents are asking us, to really think about that, and then to also understand that you want your first experience to be something that isn't awful. And how can we create that? How can you have enough self-love and self-worth to make sure that you're creating that? And there isn't a right or wrong conversation. It is a difficult one to have, understand that. But again, I think if it's evolved from a young age, we can still set these expectations and be able to manage that at least a little bit better, rather than having a closed off child that's not telling you anything at all.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so I've got a question, just a quick one, and then I want to kind of close with kind of chatting about how we can start in our teens, or we can encourage the teens we know to start preparing for even menopause.
Yes.
And a better one now. Mm-hmm. Okay, so random question, blindsiding you completely. 50 Shades of Grey. Was that something you think opened up conversation, had an overall positive or overall negative? If you cannot sit on the fence,
wow.
Which is
no. So I absolutely loved 50 Shades of Grey, but I have to tell you something hilarious. I am such an empath that I could not work out why somebody would do this. And in my mind, I kept going, but why did he need to do this? I don't understand. It had nothing to do with actually, the content necessarily, or at least the sex scenes and all of what came with that. I was so interested in trying to work out why in his brain this is something that he needed. And thank goodness when they wrote I can't remember what the one was called, that it was his point of view and told his story. But I think it opened up conversation, definitely. I don't think it was a negative thing. I think it was I don't know, I think it was excellent to open up these conversations and having us talk about this more. And whether you agree with it or not, I mean, it got the world talking, didn't it?
Yes. Yeah. I tend to agree, but I really wanted to know what you thought about that. Okay, so now let's talk about why. And I love this because I think really, I'm doing this backwards too. I'm kind of jumping into what I started doing in the moment, right? In the moment of perimenopause myself, and seeing so many women in it, and then realizing, oh my gosh, if we knew all of this 10 years earlier or 20 years earlier, how much more beneficial would that be? And you're actually you're taking it way back. So talk a little bit about, why focusing on health as a teenager sets you up for the long haul. And, to ladies listening who are in menopause who might now be wishing, gosh, if I only know.
I love that you've asked this, because it very much was the reason I wrote this book. I really saw that there was a gap in our education, and for teenagers especially. Teenagers don't care about they don't care about their fertility. They certainly don't care about menopause. But excuse me. But that could be for a couple of reasons. They've watched us complain, not be happy, not feel confident or comfortable in our bodies. And so why would you want to actually get to that point if that's what we've been talking about all this time? Of course you wouldn't want to experience it. And now you're educating women on how they don't have to feel terrible, but the foundation that you get to establish at a young age really paves the way for the rest of your life. And I talk about this in the book. I touch on menopause, and I talk about how what you do in any moment sets you up for the future. But if you really had this information to look after your hormones from the minute that they start to really control your body, then that would be a game changer for the long term, because the minute something wasn't quite right, you would have enough awareness to do something about it. And so I talk to these teenagers I talk to them about the aesthetics. I talk about acne, and I talk about weight gain, and I talk about moods and all the things that are going to be of interest to them. And then just plant that seed about menopause. You don't want it to be an awful time, and there shouldn't really be anything or any experience at any phase or stage that is horrible. And so just planting the seed, I think, to be curious and have that conversation. I'm like, have the conversation with your mum. Like, Ask her how she's feeling right now. Is she aware that what she does is setting her up for the long term, that menopause is just another phase that we transition through, and then we keep going through phases for the rest of our lives? It doesn't stop there. But often we're not aware of this, and we see it as you know, we see it as a time in our life where everything just goes downhill. And if that's what the expectation is, that's, again, we've come full circle. This is what we were talking about when we started. If you're expecting it to be awful, you're probably going to find evidence of it being awful, especially if you don't do anything about it. So again, we set up conversations. We are able to set an example so that by the time our kids go through menopause, my absolute hope is that they recognize that it's just another phase. It's not awful. You can have just as much life within you, as much vitality. Your hormones can be balanced. And if they know, if that's what their expectation then becomes, my work is done. You know what I mean? We've actually been able to change the landscape, the trajectory and landscape for women's health ongoing. And I think that these teens are really lucky to be living at this time. The other thing I do want to say is, just before we close, is that this generation that we're talking about are the smartest, the most socially aware, the kindest, the less to get in trouble. They are actually, when you look at it from a social point of view and an academic point of view, they actually have it all. They've got it all going on for them. Yet we are very good at blaming it on being teenagers. And I think we really have to stop doing that, because they actually are very intelligent and they have everything they need. But if we're constantly telling them that you're just being a naughty teenager, then they're going to start to believe that. And I don't want to change that. But I also think it's really important for us to set up what we expect long term. So starting to change the language, starting to understand even things like, often teens will come to us with a problem and we might say something like, oh, to be 16 again, my goodness, the weight of the world on your shoulders, like sarcastically. But for them, it might be their first emotional experience in something that feels extremely stressful and extremely hard. They've got nothing to compare it to. They've got no life experience, and it probably is the first time they've felt certain ways. So I think just recognizing all of these pieces and appreciating that they are smart, smaller versions of us, and that we can set them up so much better than what we had and do our part to change, like I said, the landscape of women's health.
I love it. What a message. What a movement, really. Okay, so talk to me about this book, because I want to know, because we've talked a little bit, and I'm thinking about the really poor, and my mom's 94. She's not listening, so I won't hurt her feelings. Otherwise, I would not say this. But I had a sister who was 16 years older than me, and I got the hand-me-down books that she got for sex education. And it just didn't quite do the job. So I think they were old when she got them. So I'm imagining, had I been sitting at a birthday party and got those books, I would not have been thrilled to open those in front of friends. But what about Beautiful You? What's a great set up a scenario where, how would you gift this book? Or that's my question.
Yeah, I wrote Beautiful You for the 15-year-old me. And maybe even 14-year-old. I've let my daughter read some. She was so excited to read some chapters. I haven't let her go into the sex chapters just because she's just not ready. She's not even. I'm trying to prompt these questions with her, and she will not for the life of ask them. I'm like, please ask these questions. She's getting there. But so I wrote it. It was the book I never had. And, I was wildly curious about my body when my mum gave me the talk around 12. And my mum handed me this 16-page pamphlet that had line drawings of a cross-section of the uterus that I just used to think, I don't even know how that exists in me. It just didn't even feel like it was part of me. And so this book has really been written for the 14, 15-year-old teenager. But what I've found is, and the feedback that we've received is that everyone's like, Nat, why are you marketing this to the 14, 15-year-old? I'm 42 and I've read it and I've learned so much that I didn't actually know. And how good is that to be able to read that as a older woman, and then either brush up or learn new things that we can then feel empowered enough to have the conversations with the teens. So it's kind of twofold. It's kind of, I would say it's for the mother or the grandmother as well as the loved one, the younger loved one or granddaughter or daughter. And it really is, it goes through everything. It's not just about the physiology. I talk a lot about emotions. I teach them how to empower themselves to make good decisions. We go through a lot of the emotional work about how to get what you want in life. And there's not just that, there's recipes in there as well. I kind of thought, well, you can't tell them that they need to look after their nutrition and then not show them how, right? But not recipes that you wouldn't use either. And a lot of kind of like lunchbox recipes, if you like, of, really cool things that we can make. And I feel like I haven't missed out too much. I feel like it's definitely everything that I would have wanted to learn as a teenager.
I love it. Okay, so my next question is, who's writing the boys' book?
I know, right? Well, here's the funny thing too. I think every boy should read it. And I think that the boys' version are probably not as complicated. But I do agree with you. And I actually wonder if we did a second edition, whether or not we'd include a section for boys or we write a separate book for boys. What's been really hard, I have to be honest, is that the marketing of this book, I know the book's there for the long term because this information doesn't change. There is no category for young teen or teen health. There's no category for this book. And so I was shocked by that first and foremost because it just demonstrates exactly what I'm talking about. We go from being a child to an adult, and that's not actually how it works. But according to categories of book sales, that's exactly how it apparently works. And so that's been really difficult because from a marketing perspective, it doesn't sit anywhere. So again, going back and saying, can I write a boys' book? They might be like, we don't know where that's going to sit, where that category sits. But I think that's just to speak to that. Boys, when they go through puberty, it's a very different experience. They, we can see when a boy goes through puberty. You can kind of see that a girl maybe grows some breasts and grows in height, but boys really change. Obviously, they get facial hair, their voice deepens. It's very obvious. And it's also a time, it is nowhere near as heavy for a boy to transition, I believe, than it is for a girl. Because when a girl goes through puberty, all of a sudden the conversation switches to pregnancy, and it is serious. It's a serious conversation because we haven't, again, had that evolving conversation, and it can be a really dark time for young women. So I think that awareness needs to be, definitely something that is talked about more because it's all fun and games for boys. I remember my parents joking with our friends that had teenage sons where the mums would just be like, I tell him to go to his room and be curious and to figure it out. That certainly wasn't the conversation for most of the girls at my age. It was all about how, you are now of an age where you can fall pregnant and how bad that would be if that did happen and how you didn't want it to happen. And it just creates more taboo and more mystery around something that I don't think does it any justice.
Totally agree. I love that. Okay. So listeners, where can they find, first of all, more you, your accent, and the book?
You're so kind. My book is available on Amazon. It's also available off my website. If you purchase off my website, obviously you get a signed copy. And yeah, I would absolutely love for you to have access to that. Everything's natkringoudis.com. All my handles are Nat Kringoudis. And I really love to hang out on Instagram if you haven't noticed. So if you have more questions, come over there. The other thing that I do have on my website that you might find useful is a really awesome, very quick worksheet that helps you to profile your hormones and understand what your hormones are telling you. And this can be useful for teenagers. This can be useful for mothers, for grandmothers. But I often find that, if we don't understand ourselves, how can we then go and understand our loved ones? So it might be useful for you to understand what your hormone imbalance might be before you go and have these conversations with your younger children.
Fantastic. Nat, thank you so much for joining us. And listeners, if we didn't answer a question you still have, You're welcome to put that below the show notes at flipping50.com/beautiful you, YOU. And I will also have all the links to get a hold of Nat, to the book so you can see the cover, and where you can reach her on Instagram and Facebook as well. What are you waiting for? Let's start Flipping 50 today.